had my way about it, they'd all be sent back to Russia or some other unpleasant place.
Clark Gable, Hollywood in its golden age was a world of dazzling lights and deep shadows. A place where legends were born and reputations could be shattered in a single night. Among the brightest stars to ever grace the silver screen were Robert Taylor and Clark Gable, two men whose names became synonymous with masculinity, charm, and the very essence of American cinema. Yet behind the scenes, beneath the polished veneer of fame, there were rivalries, secrets, and moments that could change everything. The story of the day Robert Taylor called Clark Gable a coward is not just a tale of bruised egos and whispered insults. It is a window into the pressures, fears, and hidden truths that haunted even the most celebrated icons of their era. To understand the weight of those words, you have to first understand who these men were. Clark Gable, King of Hollywood, was the embodiment of rugged confidence. With his signature mustache, easy smile, and magnetic presence, he could command a room, or a nation's imagination, with a single glance. His roles in films like Gone with the Wind, It Happened One Night, and Mutiny on the Bounty made him a household name, a symbol of strength and resilience during some of America's darkest years. Off-screen, Gable's life was marked by both triumph and tragedy. He was a man who had known poverty, heartbreak, and the sting of public scrutiny, yet he always seemed to rise above it, untouchable and unbreakable. Robert Taylor, on the other hand, was Hollywood's man with the perfect profile. Handsome, refined, and quietly intense, Taylor brought a different kind of energy to the screen. He was less brash than Gable, more reserved, but no less compelling. His performances in films like Waterloo Bridge, Quo Vadis, and Baton showcased a depth and vulnerability that set him apart from his contemporaries. Taylor was admired for his professionalism, his dedication, and his ability to disappear into a role. But beneath the surface, he was a man of strong convictions, someone who valued loyalty, courage, and honor above all else. The paths of these two giants crossed many times in the studios of MGM, the most powerful movie factory of its day. They were colleagues, sometimes friends, sometimes rivals, always aware of each other's presence. In the world of Hollywood, where every gesture was scrutinized and every rumor could become tomorrow's headline, their relationship was a study in contrasts. Gable was the king, Taylor the knight, each with his own code, his own demons, his own way of facing the world. The incident that would forever change their relationship began not on a film set, but in the shadow of war. The early 1940s were a time of uncertainty and fear. The world was at war, and Hollywood, for all its glamour, was not immune to the call of duty. Many stars enlisted, eager to prove their patriotism and stand shoulder to shoulder with the men fighting overseas. For some, it was a chance to escape the artificiality of studio life, to find meaning in a world gone mad. For others, it was a terrifying prospect, a leap into the unknown with no guarantee of return. Clark Gable, ever the symbol of American manhood, was expected to lead by example. When his beloved wife, Carole Lombard, was killed in a tragic plane crash while returning from a war bond tour, Gable was devastated. Her death shattered him, leaving a void that nothing could fill. In his grief, and perhaps in an effort to honor her memory, Gable enlisted in the United States Army Air Forces. The news made headlines around the world. The King of Hollywood was going to war. It was a gesture that seemed to confirm everything the public believed about him. His courage, his sense of duty, his willingness to sacrifice. But behind the headlines, the reality was more complicated. Gable's enlistment was orchestrated with the help of MGM and the military, ensuring that he would be used primarily for publicity and morale-boosting films. He did see danger, flying combat missions over Europe, but he was also protected, shielded from the worst of the war by his fame and connections. For some in Hollywood, this was enough. For others, it was not. Robert Taylor watched all of this unfold with a mixture of admiration and skepticism. He, too, had answered the call to serve, enlisting in the United States Naval Air Corps. Taylor's service was less publicized, less glamorous, but no less real. He trained as a pilot, flew missions, and spent long months away from the comforts of Hollywood. For Taylor, the war was not a stage, but a crucible, a place where a man's true character was revealed, far from the cameras and the carefully crafted images of studio life. He saw friends fall, faced his own fears, and returned home changed in ways that no one who had stayed behind could fully understand. It was in this context, with the war casting a long shadow over everything, that the fateful incident occurred. The details have been whispered about for decades, shrouded in rumor and half-truths, but the heart of the story remains the same. It happened at an MGM gathering, a party meant to celebrate the studio's stars and their contributions to the war effort. The room was filled with laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses, but beneath the surface, tensions simmered. The war had changed everyone, and old rivalries had taken on new meaning. Gable arrived late, his uniform immaculate, his smile as dazzling as ever. He was greeted with applause, surrounded by admirers eager to hear his stories from the front. Taylor, standing off to the side, watched the scene unfold. He saw the way Gable basked in the adulation, the way the studio executives fawned over him, the way the other stars deferred to his presence. For a moment, Taylor felt a surge of anger, at the unfairness of it all, at the way Hollywood could turn even the most sacred sacrifices into spectacle. The conversation turned, as it often did, to the war. Someone asked Gable about his experiences, and he launched into a story about a bombing mission over Germany. The room hung on his every word, but Taylor, who had seen the real cost of war, heard something different. A note of embellishment, a hint of self-aggrandizement. He knew the dangers Gable had faced were real, but he also knew how carefully those dangers had been managed. How much of Gable's service had been orchestrated for the cameras. Unable to hold his tongue, Taylor interrupted. "You talk a good game, Clark," he said, his voice steady but cold. "But some of us didn't have the luxury of picking our battles." The room fell silent. Gable, caught off guard, tried to laugh it off, but Taylor pressed on. "You were protected, Clark. We all know it. You let the studio and the army keep you safe, while the rest of us took our chances. That's not courage. That's theater." The words hung in the air, heavy and unforgiving. Gable's face darkened, his charm slipping for a moment to reveal something raw and wounded. He started to respond, but Taylor cut him off. "You're a coward, Gable. You played the hero for the cameras, but when it mattered, you let others take the risks." The accusation was brutal, and in that instant, the room seemed to shrink around them. No one dared to speak. The king of Hollywood had been called out, not by a critic or a rival, but by a fellow soldier. A man who had seen the same horrors and come away with a different kind of courage. The incident was over as quickly as it had begun. Gable left the party, his pride wounded, his reputation suddenly vulnerable. Taylor, for his part, felt no satisfaction, only a deep, lingering sadness. He had not wanted to humiliate Gable, but he could not let the lie stand. In a world built on illusion, Taylor had insisted on the truth, no matter the cost. The aftermath of that night rippled through Hollywood like a shockwave. Word of the confrontation spread quickly, whispered in studio corridors and printed in gossip columns, with just enough ambiguity to keep the public guessing. For the first time, the myth of Clark Gable's invincibility seemed to falter. Some in the industry sided with Taylor, quietly admiring his willingness to speak the truth, while others saw his outburst as an act of jealousy or bitterness. The truth, as always, was more complicated. Both men had faced the war in their own way. Both had suffered losses and carried scars invisible to the world. But in the unforgiving glare of Hollywood, nuance was often lost, and reputations could be made or broken on a single word. For Gable, the accusation of cowardice was a wound that cut deeper than any review or box office disappointment. He had always prided himself on his strength, his ability to endure whatever life threw at him. The death of Carole Lombard had nearly destroyed him, and his decision to enlist had been as much about escaping his grief as it was about serving his country. He had flown dangerous missions, risked his life, and seen things that would haunt him for years. But he also knew, deep down, that Taylor's words were not entirely without merit. The studio had protected him, the military had used him as a symbol, and there were moments when he had wondered if he was living up to the image the world expected of him. Taylor, meanwhile, found himself grappling with the consequences of his honesty. He had always believed in doing what was right, even when it was difficult. His own service had been marked by hardship and sacrifice, and he had little patience for those who used the war as a backdrop for self-promotion. Yet, as the days passed, he began to question whether his confrontation with Gable had been fair. Was it right to judge another man's courage by his own standards? Was it possible that Gable, in his own way, had shown a different kind of bravery, one that was no less real for being less visible? The incident marked a turning point in both men's lives. For Gable, it was a moment of reckoning, a reminder that even the greatest stars were not immune to doubt and vulnerability. He withdrew from the Hollywood social scene, spending more time alone or with a small circle of trusted friends. His performances in the years that followed took on a new depth, a sense of wariness and introspection that had not been there before. In films like The Hucksters and Run Silent, Run Deep, audiences saw a Gable who was older, wiser, and perhaps a little haunted by the ghosts of his past. Taylor, too, was changed. The war had left its mark on him, and the confrontation with Gable had forced him to confront his own limitations and prejudices. He continued to work steadily, earning respect for his professionalism and integrity. But he was never quite the same. The incident became a kind of legend in Hollywood, a cautionary tale about the dangers of pride, the complexity of courage, and the high price of truth in a world built on illusion. As the years passed, the rivalry between Taylor and Gable faded into memory, replaced by a grudging respect. They never became close friends, but they learned to coexist, each recognizing in the other a fellow survivor of a world that demanded everything and gave little in return. Their story became part of Hollywood lore, a reminder that even the brightest stars are, in the end, only human, flawed, fragile, and forever searching for meaning in the shadows of their own legend. The legend of that fateful night, when Robert Taylor called Clark Gable a coward, grew with each retelling, taking on a life of its own. In the years that followed, it became a touchstone for conversations about Hollywood's golden age, a symbol of the hidden tensions that simmered beneath the surface of glamour and fame. For some, it was proof that even the most celebrated icons were not immune to doubt and conflict. For others, it was a cautionary tale about the dangers of pride and the cost of living up to an image that could never truly be real. Hollywood, after all, was a place where reality and illusion were in constant battle, The studios worked tirelessly to craft the perfect public personas for their stars, smoothing over flaws and rewriting history as needed. Gable and Taylor were both products of this system, their lives shaped as much by the demands of the studio as by their own choices. The pressure to be brave, to be strong, to be the embodiment of American ideals was relentless. Any sign of weakness, any hint of vulnerability, could be seized upon and magnified until it threatened to consume everything. For Clark Gable, the accusation of cowardice was a private torment. He had always been aware of the gap between the man he was and the man the world wanted him to be. The war had exposed that gap in ways he could never have anticipated. He had faced real danger, yes, but he had also been shielded by his fame, given opportunities and protections that ordinary soldiers could only dream of. The guilt of surviving when so many others had not, the knowledge that his service had been as much about publicity as patriotism, weighed heavily on him. Taylor's words echoed in his mind, challenging him to confront the uncomfortable truths he had tried so hard to ignore. Yet, in the years that followed, Gable found a way to make peace with his past. He threw himself into his work, channeling his pain and doubt into performances that resonated with a new honesty. He became more selective about his roles, choosing projects that allowed him to explore the complexities of human nature rather than simply playing the hero. Off-screen, he became more guarded, less interested in the trappings of fame, and more focused on the things that truly mattered. Friendship, loyalty, and the quiet dignity of a life lived on one's own terms. Robert Taylor, too, was changed by the incident. He had always prided himself on his integrity, his willingness to speak the truth, even when it was unpopular. But the confrontation with Gable forced him to reckon with the limits of his own perspective. He realized that courage could take many forms, that the burdens carried by others were often invisible, and that judgment, no matter how righteous, could be a double-edged sword. Taylor became more introspective, more compassionate, and more aware of the complexities that defined the people around him. Their paths crossed occasionally in the years that followed, usually at industry events or charity functions. The tension between them never fully disappeared, but it softened with time, replaced by a mutual understanding born of shared experience. They had both survived the war, both endured the pressures of fame, both struggled to reconcile the demands of their public and private lives. In the end, they were not so different. Two men trying to find their way in a world that demanded perfection, but offered little forgiveness. The story of Robert Taylor and Clark Gable is more than just a Hollywood anecdote. It is a reflection of the human condition, a reminder that even the greatest among us are shaped by fear, doubt, and the longing for acceptance. It is a story about the cost of living up to an image, the pain of being misunderstood, and the courage it takes to face the truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable. As the years rolled on, the world around Taylor and Gable changed, but the echoes of that night lingered in the corners of their lives. Hollywood's golden age faded, replaced by new faces, new scandals, and a new kind of fame. Yet, for those who remembered, the story of the confrontation between Robert Taylor and Clark Gable remained a powerful lesson about authenticity and the price of stardom. It was whispered among young actors as a warning. Never let the image become more important than the man. Never forget that behind every legend is a human being, wrestling with doubts and haunted by choices. For Clark Gable, the twilight of his career was marked by a quiet dignity. He continued to work, but the roles grew fewer, the scripts less grand still. He brought to each performance a depth that could only come from a life lived in full view of the world's expectations in his final film, The Misfits. Gable's portrayal of an aging cowboy searching for meaning was more than just a role. It was a reflection of his own journey. The lines between character and actor blurred, and audiences saw not just the king of Hollywood, but a man who had loved, lost, and endured. The pain in his eyes was real, the weariness in his voice hard-earned. He died shortly after filming ended, leaving behind a legacy that was both monumental and deeply human. Robert Taylor, too, found himself transformed by time. He remained a respected figure in the industry, known for his professionalism and his unwavering commitment to his craft. But he also became more private, more selective about the projects he chose. The war, the confrontation with Gable, and the relentless demands of Hollywood had left their mark. Taylor spent more time with his family, more time reflecting on what truly mattered. He became a mentor to younger actors, urging them to seek truth in their work and to never lose sight of their own values. In his later years, Taylor's performances took on a new subtlety, a quiet strength that spoke of lessons learned and battles fought far from the public eye. The story of that one incident, when Robert Taylor called Clark Gable a coward, became a kind of myth retold in books, documentaries, and late-night conversations among film buffs. Some embellished the details, others questioned whether it had happened at all. But those who knew the men involved understood that the truth was not in the words exchanged, but in the impact those words had on two lives. It was a moment that forced both men to confront their own fears, to question their own choices, and to find a way forward in a world that rarely allowed for second chances. In the end, the incident did not define them. What defined them was how they responded, how they grew, how they changed, how they found meaning in the aftermath. Gable's courage was not in the roles he played or the headlines he made, but in his willingness to keep going, to keep searching for truth even when it was painful. Taylor's strength was not in his outspokenness, but in his ability to reflect, to learn, and to extend compassion to others, even those he once judged harshly. Their story is a reminder that greatness is not measured by the absence of fear, but by the ability to face it. That true courage is not about never stumbling, but about rising after the fall. And that, in the end, the most important battles are not fought on the screen or the battlefield, but within the heart. In the final chapters of their lives, both Robert Taylor and Clark Gable became symbols of a Hollywood that was rapidly vanishing, a world where legends were made not just by talent, but by the choices and sacrifices that shaped them. The incident that once threatened to overshadow their legacies instead became a footnote, a moment of raw honesty in a business built on illusion. For those who looked closer, it was a testament to the complexity of human nature, the way pride and vulnerability can coexist within even the most celebrated figures. Clark Gable's passing in 1960 sent shockwaves through the industry. The king of Hollywood was gone, and with him, an era of larger-than-life heroes and heroines. Yet, in the years since, his reputation has only grown. Biographers and film historians have revisited his life, peeling back the layers of myth to reveal the man beneath. They have written about his struggles with grief, his efforts to serve his country, and the burden of living up to an image that was never entirely his own. The story of Robert Taylor's accusation is often included, not as a stain on Gable's character, but as evidence of the impossible standards he was forced to meet. In the end, Gable's humanity, his doubts, his regrets, his moments of fear, made him more relatable, more enduring than any role he ever played. Robert Taylor, too, left a legacy that transcended the silver screen. He continued to act until his death in 1969, His final performances marked by a quiet wisdom and a sense of peace that had eluded him in his younger years. Those who worked with him in his later days spoke of a man who had found balance, who had learned to accept his own imperfections and to forgive those of others. The confrontation with Gable, once a source of pain and controversy, became a lesson he carried with him, a reminder that truth, while sometimes harsh, could also be a path to understanding and growth. For Hollywood, the story of Taylor and Gable is a reminder of a time when stars were more than just celebrities. They were cultural touchstones, reflections of the hopes and anxieties of an entire nation. Their rivalry, their reconciliation, and their ultimate acceptance of each other's humanity offer a blueprint for navigating the pressures of fame and the challenges of personal integrity. In a world that still demands perfection from its icons, their story is a call for empathy, for recognizing the struggles that lie beneath the surface, and for honoring the courage it takes to be vulnerable. Today, the legend of that night lingers in the collective memory of film lovers and historians. It is retold not as a scandal, but as a moment of truth, a rare glimpse into the real lives of men who spent their careers pretending to be someone else. It is a story that resonates because it is universal. Who among us has not felt the sting of judgment, the weight of expectation, or the fear of not measuring up? Who has not, at some point, been forced to confront their own limitations and to find a way forward in the face of disappointment? As the credits roll on the lives of Robert Taylor and Clark Gable, what remains is not the accusation, but the journey that followed. It is the story of two men who, in their own ways, sought to live with honor, to face their fears, and to leave the world a little richer for their presence. Their films endure. Their images flicker across screens in darkened theaters, but it is their humanity, their flaws, their struggles, their moments of grace, that truly endures. So the next time you watch a classic film and see Clark Gable flash that famous grin, or Robert Taylor deliver a line with quiet conviction, remember the men behind the myth. Remember the night when truth was spoken, when pride was wounded, and when two legends were forced to reckon with what it really means to be brave. In the end, their greatest roles were not played on screen, but in the choices they made when the cameras stopped rolling. If this story moved you, or if you have your own thoughts about the legends of Hollywood's golden age, share them below. Let's keep their memory alive, not just as stars, but as men who dared to be real, even when the world demanded otherwise.